Bosch Security and Safety Systems is a true multi-domain solutions provider. We offer solutions for video surveillance, access control, fire alarm systems, intrusion alarm systems, communication and conferencing systems, as well as fully integrated solutions. Find out more about what you can do with Bosch. Join one of our series of webinars via YouTube so you can watch them wherever you are. Simply scan the QR code below to register for the webinars. See you soon.
Hello, my name is Ozan Reşat Altındiş, and I'm the product manager for public address, voice alarm, and conferencing system in Nordics. Today, I will have the pleasure to talk about Praesensa and how we are preparing offers for Praesensa. This presentation will be a short one, but we will try to get a little bit more into the details for especially sales and project departments, for the people who are daily preparing offers for their customers with Praesensa. I hope it will be a kind of guidance for you that will make things much easier and faster for you. But always remember, these are just the main points, so you always have to consider the details in the project, and you have to make sure that you check everything before you send it to your customer. So please just accept this presentation as a kind of summary for the main points. Today's objective is to understand system design basics and to see the important points of offer preparation. And in the agenda, I will first start with the main components and the basic system design examples. Then I'm going to go through the points to consider to prepare an offer with Praesensa. And finally, I will show you a project example. Let's go to main components and basic system design examples. First, to remind you the Praesensa main components in the product family. We have, of course, a controller, as all public address systems or voice alarm systems do. That's the traffic cop, right? Managing all audio flow, knows all the loudspeaker zones, basically the controlling device of the whole system. Secondly, we have, of course, the amplifiers, two types of amplifiers we have on Praesensa product family, 8-channel or 4-channel. Both amplifiers can feed loudspeakers up to 600 watts. And then we have multifunctional power supply that we went through in our first presentation. You can also watch the first presentation from our YouTube channel. And then the desktop call station and the wall mount call station we have. So this is the main components of Praesensa family. To give you a little bit more idea about the system design, first I have to show you the rear side of the devices, and then you will easily see how we connect devices to each other. So this is the rear side of the system controller. We have 5 network ports, and none of them are PoE. And then we have a SD card, which can go up to 32 gigabytes. And for sure, we have powering sockets. Here you see the visual symbols. By the way, you can download all the visual symbols and standards from our Praesensa micro website that you see the link in the video. So just please use the QR code to go to Praesensa website. There you will find a lot of nice material that you can use during your project. This is how it looks from the front, the controller. And then secondly, we go to amplifiers. So here you see 2 types of amplifiers, the rear connections. The upper one is 8-channel amplifier. The other one is 4-channel, as you see. And of course, also in the amplifiers, we have the network connections, 2 times network ports. They are also not PoE here. Is the drawing. This is how it looks from front. Next one is the multifunctional power supply. As said, this device is multifunctional. It is a power supply for amplifiers and for controller for sure, but also has an internal switch. As you see here, 5 network ports we have, and one is SFP slot. And then we have 2 PoE. It's always like the first and the second network ports are PoE. So for example, you can connect your call stations. And then you see the powering for 3 amplifiers. And of course, finally, we have the battery charger where you connect your batteries. So as you see, this device is not only a power supply, it's also a battery charger, it's also a switch, and it's also a device which can give you contact inputs and outputs. So you can create different scenarios. When there's a call, you can open a garage door or do something else with a third-party device. This is how it looks from front. Of course, in front, we don't have any buttons or something. You cannot really turn off the devices and so on. And the call stations, we have 2 network ports on the call stations. One thing is important here that, we're not connecting call stations to each other. We always connect call stations to a main component. It, for example, can be the MPS unit here, as it has the PoE outputs, or you can also use any other PoE device for that. It can be a switch, it can be something else, but you just have to make sure that you are comply with the EN54 rules, or if there is any specific rules in your country for that, you should be checking that standards. And then we have a line level audio input for background music. It's a regular 3.5mm stereo jack, so you can easily connect your local background music source to your call station. This is how it looks when you connect main components to each other. As you see, from controller through the amplifiers, we go to multifunctional power supply unit, and then we're coming back to controller. So there's a loop there. And then the PoE outputs of MPS unit is feeding the call stations. It could be that there's only one call station and we are feeding that call station with 2 PoE outs. Then the connection will be redundant. For example, if you have an emergency microphone, which is really important to you, that you have to make sure all the connections are redundant, also the power, that could be the scenario. But here, just standard call stations, maybe business calls or commercial calls, so they didn't see the need in this example. This is how it looks from the network side, and from the powering side, this is the connections. As you see, the multifunctional power supply is giving 24 volts to the controller with the light yellowish cable you see there, and the dark yellow or orange cable shows the connection between MPS units and the amplifiers. So here the MPS3 PRA-MPS3 unit is feeding 3 amplifiers with 48 volts DC. And then in this example, we see the battery connected to MPS unit. Well, of course, MPS unit doesn't require a battery, but if it's an EN54 system, or you are working under some regulations, then of course you might need a battery. Otherwise, it's not for the system to work, it's just for powering redundancy. When you install everything to a rack, this is how it will look like. If you are, for example, doing a medium to large size application, your rack probably will seem like this. There's a controller on top here in this example, and then you see 9 amplifiers. 9 amplifiers means you need 3 MPS units. Again, 1 MPS unit can feed 3 amplifiers, not to forget. And then 1 battery has been connected per MPS unit. So this is very typical rack for a Praesensa project. And one thing here is a small hint. We always advise you to install MPS units lower part of the cabinet and then put batteries to the very lower part of the rack cabinet to make sure that the weight is distributed equally. As you will remember, the Praesensa can be centralized or decentralized. We have seen how the rack will look like if we are going for a centralized system. In the decentralized system, there is one thing important you have to remember. If you look to the drawing in the, let's say, first Praesensa system, you see we have one controller, we have 3 amplifiers and the MPS unit. And then in the system B and system C, you don't see any controllers. In the traditional systems, when you are doing such decentralization, you always have to make sure that each system has a controller, because the system has to be controlled and managed by a hardware. But here in Praesensa, that's not the situation. As all devices are IP and can work standalone, you don't need a controller anymore. So this example can be expanded actually. Here you see 3 centers. It could be 30 different technical rooms, for example. Then instead of using 30 controllers, we're just using one controller. That's what we also said in the commercial presentation, if you go to that video already. So here is a real example from a real project. With these kind of benefits, as said before, Praesensa is offering a very competitive cost of ownership, actually. So let's go to points to consider for offer preparation. There are some points that you have to make sure that you check before you send your offer to your customer. And the first one, maybe you will be surprised that we're not starting from controllers, but of course, the most important thing here is the amplifier quantity and type, because this parameter will affect a lot of different things during your offer preparation. Praesensa is using an effective power utilization, smart power sharing method. So the amplifier itself can measure the load on the loudspeaker zones and can manage the power output automatically by itself. This will reduce, of course, the amplifier spill, and you will need less amplifiers. So here is a real example that I will show soon how we do it in the project. But first thing you have to check when you're starting a project is the loudspeaker zones quantity. How many loudspeaker zones you will need, and what are the power requirements per zone. So then you have to make sure that you are exceeding the required power of the system with your amplifier power. In other words, your amplifier power, the total amplifier load or power, must be bigger than the required power for sure. And then you have to figure out how many 8-channel amplifiers you will use and how many 4-channel amplifiers you will use. When you are done with amplifier quantity, you have to remember if you need a redundant amplifier or not per that zone, for that particular zone. But actually in Praesensa, that's not a problem because you have an internal 600 watt spare amplifier channel inside the amplifier already. So you don't have to add your offer another amplifier just for redundancy, at least another hardware. If you need a specific, a very special application, then of course you should consider that. But normally there is always an internal spare amplifier channel built in the device. And if one of the main amplifier channels, the first 8-channel or the first 4-channel, depends which amplifier you choose, is always will automatically switch to the internal backup amplifier if there will be a failure or something else. For details of this topic, please complete Praesensa expert and master level trainings that you can find on Bosch Learning Management System. So how we select our amplifiers, small example. Let's say we have 5 zones of 60 watt power need, 3 zones of 50 watt, 3 zones of 120, and a big zone with 200 watts. Maybe we're using heavy directional speakers and so on. So as you see here in the drawing, you have to, of course, match, and you have to make sure which amplifier or which amplifier channel will serve for which loudspeaker zone. So just a quick drawing will help there, maybe. And then you see the grouping on the right hand side. The first 8 loudspeaker zones will be fitted by the 8-channel amplifier, which in total will require 540 watts. That's fully okay because we can go up to 600 watts. And then the second amplifier will feed 4 loudspeaker zones with 560 watts in total. So with this method, you can easily select your amplifier type, and you can decide how many amplifiers you will need. This is the first point you have to do. One note before we go to MPS. Normally in traditional systems, when you're choosing your amplifiers, you always have to consider the individual loudspeakers on powering, because according to that information, you will choose your amplifier channel. What I mean is the following. For example, I have a 50 watts of zone. Then I have to make sure that I'm having a 50 watt amplifier channel at least. There's no 50 watt amplifier channel in the market. There's only 60 watt amplifier channel. So I will pick up a 60 watt amplifier channel. And then the other zone will be 100 watts. So I will make sure that I'm having a 120 watts of amplifier channel, or 125 watts. And with this method, then I will calculate how many amplifier channels I will need. And with that information, I will calculate what type of amplifiers I will need. And that, of course, will increase my amplifier quantity, the hardware. And of course, that will increase the cost of ownership. So this is how Praesensa Smart Power Sharing helps you. This is the real life example. You can easily see by comparing 2 mindsets how we are reducing number of amplifiers here. Yeah, second point, the MPS3 quantity. The first question to calculate MPS3 quantity is how many amplifiers you have to use. Because an MPS unit can serve for 3 amplifiers, we have already thought that. The other limitation or the other points to consider is the input and outputs, the control inputs and outputs. If you have different scenarios, if you have many of them, you have to make sure that you have enough control input and outputs. And if you don't have enough, then you might consider to add another hardware maybe. One Praesensa MPS3 unit contains 8 supervised control inputs and 8 contact outputs. This will probably be enough maybe for most of the projects, but in case it's not, you have to consider. And then how many call stations you will connect, and how many call stations you will connect to that particular MPS unit. Because it might be that you have a remote call station, maybe in different part of the building, then you maybe have to carry one of your devices to that part, so you have to do it a little bit more decentralized maybe, or everything is built in one part and you just have to count the network ports if it is enough or not. Of course, that depends to your project, but yeah, how many call stations you will use, that's the question. Because we have 2 network ports with 1 gigabyte connection with PoE on the MPS unit. Will they be a redundant connection? Because if they will be redundant, then you will need 2 PoE ports per call station. Otherwise, you will need only 1 per 1 call station. And maybe there are some different scenarios possible. You can maybe use a PoE switch. Maybe that call station is not an emergency call station carrying important messages, or maybe your project is not EM54 required. Then you might also consider to use another, I don't know, PoE injector, midspan, or something else that can basically feed your call station. That's also possible. Last but not least, for multifunctional power supply, you have to consider the battery management. Please remember that one device can maximum go up to 230 ampere hour, and there will be one battery connected to your MPS unit. So if I don't really think that will be the case for most of the projects again, but if that's the case, you have to consider to add an MPS unit maybe to your project. All these things will, of course, give a higher system availability to your system. So now we know how many amplifiers we will use and how many multifunctional power supply we need. And then the third question is how many cold station and what are the types. We have two types of cold stations, the desktop and the wall mount. First, maybe we have to ask how many locations we have that we will take announcements from. Of course, this is very obvious and very physical question that you can easily count the operation centers or business calls needed or emergency calls needed. Do you need a fireman's microphone, for example? Do you have any special department for that, sending fire calls and so on? What type of call stations you need? Will they be wall mounted or will they be desktop? How you will connect your call stations, that question we already checked in when we're checking the MPS quantity, but here you will make sure once more that all call stations are being fed. Do you want to have an emergency call station? Redundant again, but here you can also define if that particular call station will be an emergency call station or a business. That can change your scenario. So maybe you can also give that information to your technical people if you have that information beforehand, and then they can configure the call station as a maybe fireman's call station or just a regular call station, because in the emergency call stations in Praesensa, you can disable the touchscreen and you can just show the very basic and very important information instead of background music and all other commercial applications. You can basically disable if that particular call station is an emergency call station. We already talked about the number of PoE inputs. And we already said you can consider other PoE injector options if you don't require EM54. And finally, how many call station extensions you need per call station, how many zones you want to manage via that particular call station. Minimum, it must be one. All Praesensa call stations will require at least one call station extension. And maximum, it can go up to 4. And of course, all buttons on the extension can be configured. The general and basic usage is to select the loudspeaker zone, but you can also define something else and configure the scenario for sure. And this part, of course, gives a very nice user experience with a touchscreen, with a nice look and nice design. Next question, and finally, the number of controllers. Of course, each and every system at least needs one controller. It's mandatory for each and every system. The question here is, do you need a redundant one? Then you will make it 2. Or in the future, we will support more controllers in one system. So maybe you need even more than 2. It might be a critical application, or maybe a decentralized application that you want to use more than 2 controllers. You're connecting different systems to each other. That might be the case. That will come in future. But today the question is, do you need 1 controller or do you need 2 controllers for redundancy? The 5th point is number of end-of-line supervision boards. Praesensa basically supports every supervision methods known in the market today. So it can be like regular end-of-line board with a pilot tone. You can do the supervision. You can do A and B cabling for your loudspeaker zones, and you can do Class A cabling. And first, maybe you have to think about this, how you will do the loudspeaker cabling, because this will affect the number of end-of-line boards. For example, if you're using A and B cabling, which means that you're using one amplifier channel to feed basically A loudspeaker zone and the B loudspeaker zone, they probably are in the same location. They are just backup for each other. That's generally how we do the application. So then this means per amplifier channel we will need 2 end-of-line boards. Otherwise, if you're using a Class A loop or regular cabling, we just need 1 end-of-line board per amplifier channel or per loudspeaker zone. We are using a very small end-of-line board here. You see on the picture, it's almost in the size of 1 euro. So it's really, really small. But more importantly, we are using a very inaudible discontinuous pilot tone. This is a typical problem, or let's say one of the favorite asked questions to our side. What is the frequency of our pilot tone? And it is 25.5. This means you cannot hear that audio, because it might be really disturbing, especially for sensitive ears like children's, or in some parts of the world we see that there are more sensitivity actually hearing this kind of audio, but 25.5 kilohertz is impossible to hear. So it will not be disturbing for your customers and for yourself. Finally, as an optional question, do you need a software? Your end user would like to use any kind of device to reach to Praesensa, having a nice fancy interface. Then you might add a Praesensa Opal, the license, and the OPAS, the small computer, a server computer, to your offer. But don't forget, this part is optional. So this server is not serving Praesensa to work or something. Praesensa can work standalone. This server only works for Praesensa software side, so that's totally optional part. But of course, it's a question you have to ask yourself during your offer if you need this. Or maybe you can add this part as an option to your offer, so the customer can just easily choose it or not. To give you an important hint about the distances, if you are using a Cat6 cable and connecting things to each other with Cat6, then of course you can go up to 100 meters. That's not a limitation from Praesensa side, that's the limitation of Cat6 itself. But if you want more distances, if you need to create kind of subclusters, if you need to carry some of the main components to a remote place, then of course you can go to fiber, and then you can go up to 10 kilometers. With all this information we went through, let's take an example here. I think this will make things a little bit more clear. So we have specification file, basically says I need 20 zones of 50 watts power. I need 2 call stations with at least 12 buttons, and we will be using 2 music sources in the system as a background music. Of course, as said, we will first choose how many amplifiers we will need. So if we are using 3 amplifiers with 8 channel, then we can go up to 24 zones, and the system requires only 20 zones, so that's a match. It's okay. And 20 zones of 50 watts, so in total it is 1000 watts. And with 3 amplifiers we already have 1800 watts. So when we check the total power requirement, that's also okay. And they require 50 watts of power. That's fully okay for our Praesensa amplifiers. We can easily supply that power. So we make sure that we decide to use 8-channel amplifier and 3 of them. And that means we will, of course, need a MPS unit to feed the amplifiers. 1 MPS unit is enough. We can feed 3 amplifiers. I would like to have batteries on top. Then what I have to do, I will go to Bosch website, download power calculator for Praesensa. that will be published very soon. If you're watching this video in May 2020, it will be published very soon on our website. Then you will do your calculation, and then you will see how much power you need per that system, and according to that information you will choose your battery type, and you will add it to your offer maybe. Then you will choose the call stations. Here in this example we have 2 desktop call stations. This means we at least need 2 extensions, because per 1 call stations we always need at least 1 call station extension, please remember. So that we also added to the offer. And then it says there is 2 music sources. So we have to consider how we are receiving that audio channels. Most of the time, still today, these kind of sources are analog. And Praesensa is, as you know, using Omnio, meaning that Dante in the audio transfer part. So then maybe we will need a small converter which will convert analog audio into the Dante, and then we will take it as a Dante stream into the Praesensa system. So then we add another audio input device. There are many brands we have tested with our devices. So if you need an advice on that side, what kind of devices or what kind of converters we have tested so far, you can always discuss with your local Bosch MKR product managers or salespeople. And then the system will look like this. We will have a controller, 3 amplifiers connected to each other via the network cable. Cat6 can go up to 100 meters, and in this example, if you are using them all in the same place, it's of course more than enough. Then we go to power supply, the multifunctional power unit, and make sure that with the blue cable we connect everything to each other. And if there is something has to be redundant, we make a loop. That's basically the mindset. Of course, the audio here, the analog audio part, we will just use for background music, so we don't need redundancy. We just simply connect it to the controller. And that particular device will convert analog audio into a Dante stream, and we will use that audio channel in Praesensa and will easily be able to control. And then the call stations connected, you see there. The power connectors, again, 24 volt goes to controller, 48 volts goes to amplifiers. And then if you need a battery, you can also add it. Once more, here is the Praesensa microsite. You will also see the QR code in this presentation right here. But if for some reason that will not work, you can always visit the micro website. There you will see architecture and engineering specs, the data sheets, all the calculators we have published today will be on that website. This site might be temporary, then we will carry it to another Bosch website. But if this will be the case, we will always be informing you. Thank you very much for watching this video. More to come, so please follow our YouTube channel. Thank you very much.